All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another in the series live Learn from the Pros. Let me just pull this up on my phone so I can see comments. I want to thank you guys for joining us. We did our first one yesterday. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, let me turn down my phone because it's going to feed back into this microphone. But I'm very happy to have my good friend LJ Mitchell with me today. LJ, thanks for joining, man.
Yeah, man.
And
I'm
of
trying
course,
to look this up myself so I can answer questions too.
yeah, if you pull up the stream, I think we'll be able to see the comments. Um, so just a few housekeeping matters. If you have questions, definitely feel free to drop them down below in the chat. Both LJ and I got the chat pulled up, and we'll try our best to get to as many questions as we can within the hour today. I know LJ's got a service he's got to prep for afterwards, so we're going to try our best to keep this either under an hour or to the hour as much as we can. So for those of you watching, please let me just get the link over to LJ. I just saw you text. For those of you watching, if you haven't already done so, make sure you head over to my website, jasonreynoldsproaudio.com, and register so that you can stay in the loop with what is happening with these not just with the live Learn from the Pro sessions, but everything else that we're trying to do. Make sure you head over to my website and register, and then also check out my Patreon link. If you're an audio professional and you're looking for an opportunity to get some good training during this time, we've set up a Patreon page, not just for training, but also to build a community. So to me, the most important part of what we're doing is the community. You get access to other audio professionals. We have a lot of our pros that are on our Learn from the Pro sessions are actually in that chat room. So you'll be able to bounce ideas back and forth. You'll be able to have access to those people throughout moving forward. All right, so that's a big part of it. And of course, we're going to be launching masterclasses and mentorship very soon. So definitely want you to check that out if you haven't already done so. It's patreon.com/Jason Reynolds Pro Audio, and that link is also in the description of this video. So I want to jump right into it. LJ is the music director at Elevation Church. One of, in my opinion, and again, disclaimer, everything I talk about on these Learn from the Pros website, live sessions is my opinion, right? So I don't speak anything of fact or any empirical data. I can just stress that it is my opinion. So I have a lot of friends from Hillsong who subscribe and also watch a lot of my stuff. Ricky Cook, head of audio at Hillsong, has become a friend of mine. We've connected over the last few weeks. So, but in my opinion, the two most influential churches in this time, who are leading in technology and music, in just their approach on how to handle this period of COVID-19 and how we continue to successfully do church in this time, is Hillsong and Elevation Worship. So I'm very blessed to be able to have access to Ricky, who is not only head of audio at Hillsong, but also manages their networking and how they interconnect all their campuses and locations at the main campus. So Ricky is going to be my guest, one of my guests coming up soon. So that's going to be exciting. And today we get a chance to hear from LJ Mitchell, who's music director at Elevation. So I'm very excited to talk to you today, LJ. We go back a long way. We met, what, I think maybe 15 years ago, about then, I think, if my memory is correct.
I can't remember when, I think it was like if I can remember correctly, we were doing a show in Brampton. I remember playing for Tanya Moulton. That's all I remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Way back then.
I don't even remember that part. That's crazy. That's a real long time ago, but I'm definitely blessed to know you and call you a brother and friend. So let's get into it. You're music director of I mean, Elevation Church, for those who are watching who are not necessarily familiar with Elevation and what Elevation does, not only are they a fairly large church, I would imagine you're one of the largest now in North America for sure. Um, it's quite interesting, but because you're also a multi-campus
Right.
church, that's not only multi-campus in the North Carolina area where the headquarters is based, but you have a campus here in Toronto. You have campuses all over the place, and you have a fairly large online congregation that spans the entire globe. So you are tasked with being musical director for that entire massive operation, which just thinking about it for me is like it's crazy to think that that's even possible. But let's talk about how you got started in music. Can you remember your earliest days in music and what that looked like?
Absolutely. My first introduction to music was at my first church, Mississauga Missionary Baptist Church. Piano player was Rob Irvine. I still
Wow.
call him to this day. He really inspired me to play. He would play hymns and he would add his own flair to it all the time. He wouldn't just play from the hymnal. So I got lessons with him real quick. And then I can't even remember, the first piano I played on was something I set up on my bed. It
Wow.
had like it was analog and it had like a power supply and you'd flip it over and it was probably about, I don't even want to say it was 49 keys. I want to say it was like 35 or something like that. And it was a weird number. And I remember it had stickers, A, B, C, D. And then, so I would go to his house for lessons. And then shortly after that, I went to the Royal Conservatory, which you're familiar with in Toronto, classically trained. And so I was classically trained, paralleled school years with the grade years of
Right.
classical. That's how
Now, that's interesting because not a lot of gospel slash Christian piano players are classically trained. So, was that from the influence of your earliest music teacher that suggested that, or is that something that your parents thought was important? Like, how did that sort of come about? Because a lot of, especially in gospel churches, a lot of keyboard players learn to play by ear and sort of do that throughout their career, quote unquote, as a church keyboard player. So why classical music?
honestly, my mom and dad put me in classical lessons. My first teacher was Miss Brock. She was a Korean lady, and she would slap my hands if my posture wasn't right. And so it wasn't really a choice. If I'm honest, probably up until grade grade 11,
Mm-hmm.
I was taking classical lessons because I had to. So
Right.
Royal Conservatory playing, and I had a love for it. My favorite composer, one of them of all time, Beethoven. I thought he's a genius. So play his sonatas and play his different studies and whatnot. And then it wasn't until grade 11, my music teacher, Miss Baxter, gave me an Oscar Peterson cassette tape.
Wow.
We get requests, and that changed the game because I never knew the piano could sound like that outside,
Right.
you know, classical music. So, and then also playing in church with him. So it was very stagnant.
Right.
Um, yeah, it was just very much down the line.
Mm-hmm. And I've always one of the things from the very first time I've heard you play keys, I've always been impressed with your articulation. If that's the correct word I'm using as a keyboard player. I'm not a keyboard player, just in case. I know a few chords, but I'm definitely not a keyboard player. So feel free to correct me if I use some incorrect terms. But I was very impressed, which obviously in my mind comes from that period of being classically trained. Always very impressed with how clean your playing is. And so obviously you draw from that time of not just classical training, but when you mention names like Oscar Peterson, I don't think it gets much more articulated from the
Well,
standpoint of a piano player.
having a daughter of my own, I think that I wouldn't change the way I did it. I would put her in classical music because it's the foundation. It, if anything, it's a good sound technical foundation for you to be able to know what to do. So you're right, like learning to play your scales, learning to play, cross your fingers over at the right spot, your arpeggios, your hand and all that other stuff like that. Like that stuff is the foundation, and it allows you to do a lot of the stuff that you want to do, you know, in the future. I don't think if I didn't have that as a foundation, I don't know. I'm by far not the best piano player. There are guys that I look up to, and
Mhm.
I'll always look up to them, always trying to learn, always trying to be better. But I think that with that foundation, it taught me how to do things the right way, or the practiced way, or even
Right.
the theoretical way, so to speak. So
Right. And how important has, and now in the capacity that you're in, I think more than just being a music director at a large church, Elevation Worship is a multi-platinum recording artist. So so I would imagine, from my standpoint as an engineer, having a solid theoretical foundation and knowing music theory has to be has to factor greatly into the abilities you lean on now, giving direction to other players of instruments, but as well as in the recording setup and the recording scenario. Because I mean, there's probably a lot of church MDs that will watch this that say, well, yeah, we don't record, so I don't know if I really need to learn theory. But one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later is also um, training others and discipling others to which is an essential part of growth, because you can only be in one place. And so being a multi-campus church, obviously training and mentoring other people becomes a massive part of what you do. So how important is that music theory foundation? So not just being able to play something great, but understanding what you're playing, essentially.
well, the thing is with music is it's universal. So it's a universal language. So if you learn theory, you're learning how to speak. So it doesn't matter what country you go to, it doesn't matter what language. Well, there might be a language barrier naturally, but C chord in China is a C chord in Canada is a C chord in Jamaica. It's the same thing. So
Right.
knowing your theory and knowing what to do gives you that foundation. And that's something that we tell a lot of our musicians, and you know, shout out to my man Leota, who's doing lessons online right now, and
Mm.
doing some myself, and a lot of the other guys, a lot of the other MDs that were here before I even got here.
Right.
And to the ones that come, we're always trying to impart, you know, learn your theory, take the time to learn your instrument, because that will give you the knowledge to be able to do what you want to do. So without that, if I could be honest, without that, there are seasons where I didn't know what I was doing, and it was hindering what I was playing. So it's like you can listen to a CD. Much of when I got into gospel, learning gospel, I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
I would do it because it sounded right, but I
Right.
didn't know what I was doing. So I would, oh man, Aaron Lindsay played this lick. So I'd learn it, and then you put it in all 12 keys, and then it sounds right. But you can always tell the difference between a guy that learned a bunch of licks and stuff and put it in his playing versus a guy that actually knows what he's doing. Like you listen to Kevin Bond play the piano, he
Right.
knows what he's doing. So
Right.
he whatever he does, he plays, and it's like, wow, it's mind blowing. It's not just like nonsense. Where there's some musicians, they're not my favorite kind of guys, but I don't know. This is personal, right?
Yeah,
so
we said the disclaimer at the beginning. It's
so there
opinion.
are a lot of cats that I wouldn't even call for them, and it's not because they can't play, but since they don't know what they're doing. So you put
Right.
a guy that doesn't know what he's doing in the context of a band, where everybody plays their part and everybody plays their role, and he's just all over the place playing. And oh man, I learned this lick. Let me play this here, or I'm gonna play this tritone. I mean, we're gonna obviously get into all of this stuff later
Right.
because it's kind of a hot spot for me right now.
Right.
Just released a song, a rock song, and it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
rap, and
Absolutely.
and you know, you start looking at people raising eyebrows to you, like, well, why are you playing that? Or that's not what we do. That's not our sound and stuff like that. So we can talk about that later.
Mhm.
But theory gives you that foundation that allows you to be able to play and know what you're doing. And then you can find your pocket, because that's really what being a band member is about.
Right.
Pocket, knowing what to do, knowing what not to do, and knowing how to make your instrument kind of shine in those right moments, you know?
Yeah, because I guess in a lot of ways, like it's funny because I have a lot of friends who are musicians, right? And they always want to invite me to sheds, right? And I always tell them that what the shed thing is not really, I'm not really interested in sheds at all because I'm not really attracted to licks. Like, um, so I'll give you an example, right? Like last year, or maybe 2 years ago, maybe it was last year. At NAM now, they have a dedicated building for pro audio, right? So we no longer have like we don't have to go into the music instrument section. And in my opinion, that is the greatest thing that they could have ever done at NAM for an audio guy. because because I man, it used to be like everybody like practices all their licks for the entire year, and then they just go to NAM, sit on around an instrument and play every single lick they know. And to me, like, bro, yeah, like it's for me as a non-musician, it just sounds like noise to me. Like I've always been more so a fan of, and going back to the whole Nam thing. I remember years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe it was 2018. I think it was 2018. Anyway, one of the years, it was the first year of Groove Live, which I, a lot of people know I endorse Groove Gear. Shout out to Groove Gear. They're actually the first company that took a chance on me and say, "Hey, well, I was a nobody at the time, and they hooked up an endorsement for me, which was crazy." And so they asked me to do sound for the very first Groove Live, right? And there was a whole lot of bands with people just showing licks, man. And I'll never forget this. The band that closed the show at the end of the night was a band called Band of Brothers. It was Andrew Goucher on bass,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Um, Teddy can't. No, it wasn't Teddy. Gordon Campbell was on drums. Eddie Brown was on keys, right? Um, and I think Donald Hayes was on saxophone, and Yohei Nakamura, who plays guitar for Stevie Wonder, was on guitar. And bro, they stood up, they got up on the bandstand, and they weren't playing licks. They were just, bro, it was some of the best music I've ever heard in my life. And I wasn't a huge like Andrew Goucher, like I wouldn't have called myself an Andrew Goucher expert prior to that, like to be very honest. And dude, like what I heard that night, I was like, man, and those guys can play licks. Like they're I mean, if you put Andrew Goucher the shed on a bass, he's gonna run circles around most people. But it was just everything to do with tone, to do with balance internally as a band. You could just tell that these dudes were a different level of experience, like from the younger cats that was playing that night. It's something incredible. I'll never forget that experience. But you mentioned the name Kevin Bond, and it's funny because we've been friends such a long time. There are keyboard players that I know about because of you. So like Kevin Bond, and Kevin Bond has produced some of the biggest hits in gospel music of all time. When you talk about like Kurt Carr stuff, we lift our hands in the sanctuary, like every church was singing that at one point. Like everybody, if you weren't singing that song, yo, you weren't saying nothing, right? But guys like Noel Hall, I used to hear you talk about Noel Hall a lot back in the day when we just became
Yeah,
friends.
man.
And guys like Aaron Lindsay. I mean, I consider myself an Israel and New Breed super fan. I think Israel completely revolutionized the way that praise and worship's done. I'm a big fan of him as a person. I've had the opportunity to work with him a few times. I'm a huge fan. And Aaron Lindsay, of course, is a very big part of that sound. And by I guess the trickle down effect, guys like Justin Rains, who is definitely at the top of my list in my top five for bass players anywhere. Just not only their skill as musicians, but their heart. So talk a little bit about some of those influences, your early influences in gospel, and some of those names you used to call to me.
It's awesome. It's the humbling thing is I'm a super fan of Kevin Bond, but I've never actually. I think I met him once, but so maybe someone watching can make a connection so I could talk to him. But
Hit up Kevin and be like, yo, listen, you need to meet this guy, LJ. I mean, I'll tag him after.
it's crazy because you mentioned all of those guys, and it's really humbling to think that at one point in my life, like I studied those guys. Like you mentioned Noel, but Fred Hammond was like the man, and he would do the shoulder roll thing, which was
Right.
just amazing. We go to Detroit and I watch him play, and just the tone and the sound and all the Detroit, and watching him go live with Fred and Tommy Walker. And the thing that you pick up, the thing that I would pick up from Noel was his touch and his ability to play. He'd do runs and licks and they'd all fit, and it wouldn't be too much. You know,
Right.
that's like picking that up from him. And then Kevin Bond's dexterity is just like out of this world. You know, you talk about the stuff that he did with Donnie McClurkin that revolutionized the game, or the stuff that he did with Jake's, those albums. I'm talking like studying those things to the point of like, you know, it wasn't like back in the day where it wasn't like now where you could just go on YouTube and then there's some joker on here who's doing a YouTube tutorial Dr. Craze or something like that, you know.
How to play a flat 7.
Back in the day, you had to start the CD, play, start, play, stop, and you were trying to get the licks and trying to get the nuances, and so there's that, and then well, you mentioned like Israel and New Breed, and if you're a super fan, then I'm right there with you, because anybody who knows me knows that eat, sleep, and breathe those guys. Like they were inspirational. Watching them kind of take over while Fred was doing his thing, watching them take over and just revolutionize worship and the way how we, you know, the way how we express ourselves and stuff. And meeting those guys, going to deeper conferences back in the late 2000s, and it was really there kind of like, I think my outlook on ministry changed, because you're mentioning guys like Aaron and Marvin McQuitty, and you know, Strong and all these guys, and you go up to them and you talk to them, and they're the most humble guys, man. Like they'll sit down and they'll talk to you, and they'll impart to you. I'll never forget, you know, Aaron, up until a couple of years ago, him seeing me and just laying hands on imparting, because it became more than, oh, this guy's on the come up, or what can he do for me, or how can I make the next record? And it was all about imparting ministry and making sure that I understood the weight, the gravity, the man, just the sheer privilege of getting to do what we get to do. Here, 10 people. Right now, we're in an empty auditorium, so there's no one there right now. But you know, it's crazy to think that we're ministering to the most people we've ever ministered to in a season like this, more than any stadium, more than any, you know, any show that we could have ever done right now. And the focus just has to be on Jesus. The focus has to be on ministering. So I lean towards those guys. And a lot of them I'm honored to call friend. A lot of them I'm honored to call big brother, and they're still imparting to this day. And that's just, I think, I don't want to say that having the technical ability isn't important, because it naturally is. You know, your gift will make room for you and stuff like that. But I'm just learning now as I get older, it's all about imparting. It's all about heart. It's all about walking with guys through life, because I firmly believe that the gifts of God are without repentance. He'll give them to you, and everything that you need is inside of you to do what he's called you to do. It may take time. It's in seed form, you know, depending on how much you water, depending on how much you use it, is depending on how much it'll grow. How much sun, S-U-N, how much S-O-N you let shine on the gift, that's how much it'll grow. And just being able to do that in this capacity is just, so it's kind of been mind-blowing. Sorry to go off on a tangent. You get me talking about my mentors, and it's just like, those are the things that they impart. And then you know, into this season now where like my favorite worship leader, Chris Brown, bar none,
Mm-hmm.
is like my supervisor, and he's always imparting and always just,
Right.
you know, trying to make sure that I'm I'm not gonna say taken care of because that could have different connotations, but I'm always like
Mm-hmm.
I'm always just healthy, I guess is the right
Right.
word.
Right. And what's interesting to me, I am a big believer in mentorship. If I honestly believe, and again, we did the disclaimer at the beginning, so I can speak freely, but I believe that talent without mentorship often dies. Or if it doesn't die, it takes longer to germinate. It's like a seed that only gets water every few days, right? Like sometimes there's enough moisture in the soil where it eventually sort of sprouts and does its thing. But talent with great mentorship, and so when but here's what a lot of people don't understand. I always think that people who are unwilling to share, are unwilling to mentor others, are unwilling to impart, and which is why we do these series. I will give away 100% of my secrets because first of all, I don't think any of my gigs that I have now are dependent on what I know. To a degree, like you said, the technicalities are important as
Bro.
a foundation,
They gotta.
but they hire me for me, not the fact that I can push faders and turn knobs really well. But what a lot of people I don't think understand is that mentorship does just as much for the mentor as it does for the mentee. Because honestly, before I really started digging into mentoring, and I'm it's not a matter of boasting for me. It's a matter of I am so proud of some of my guys that have gone, like David now, who's helping me run my platform, and he's moderating a lot of my lives, and he's now Stephen Marley's monitor engineer. I met him while he was still in school, and he's out with the Marleys doing a fantastic job. They love him in that camp. Jamal, who's head of audio at Soundbox, and these guys have really taken what I've taught them and what I've done, and really taken it to the next level. So it's not I by no means have 100% to do with their success. They would have been successful anyway. But that mentorship has done equally for me as the mentor, because even something as simple as being intentional about what you're doing, from the engineer standpoint, when somebody comes to me now and says, well, how do you EQ a kick drum and why do you do it that way? Right? I may have never thought about it before. When I was just standing at a console and mixing, I just turn in knobs because I don't really have time to stop and think. But now when you ask me that question, I got to go figure out why I do the things I do. And that does more for me a lot of the times than it does for the mentee, right?
I I it's amazing that on the other side, and you know how you hear terms like I'm on the come up, or I'm in my prime, or you know, and I'm falling off and stuff like that. I just realized that what I crack a joke sometimes and say my ideal scenario is going to be I'll be 77 and my pastor will be 78 and we'll still be playing music
Right.
until the cows come home and stuff like that. But you know, you have to be able to adjust in a season. And one of the hardest things I think musicians have to do, and the hardest thing about being the guy, is who are you looking for? Because being the guy won't last forever, but who you impart to will last an eternity. And that becomes your reward. Like you said, at one point at one point in life, and especially the generation that we have and just all the technology that we have and stuff, and the amount of followers might be my reward,
Mm-hmm.
or the amount of people that know my name might be my reward. And I've chased both of them, and they're very vain, they're very dull, they don't last long, because the same amount of people that you want to follow you are the same amount of eyes that are on you. And God forbid if you turn left when you should have turned right, then there's the same eyes and mouths that, that are gonna kill you. So you can't build your platform for fame and for that stuff. But I tell you, man, impartation, it lasts an eternity. There are guys now on the team. I mentioned one like Leota, and I mentioned like E and Nick and a lot of these young cats that the name of the game is to pour out my life into them, because that's going to be my that's that becomes your reward, man. It becomes way more fulfilling than to be the guy. You could only be the guy for so long. And if I'm completely honest, I don't ever think we were built to be the guy.
Right.
Always built to, I mean, the person that we follow, the Lord that we follow, his first object, the first thing he did when he got on the planet, he got baptized, went to the wilderness, dealt with the devil, came back, and is like, all right, cool. I need 12 people. Let's go. Who I can impart to. I got 3 years to impart this message to people. So I don't know where sometimes we get it mixed up. I don't know where we think that if God gives us something, why it's not our duty to give to the next guy. And I thank God for the people in my life that have imparted to me. I was thinking the other day how when we first got our start, how one of the things that I honored about you was you actually took the time to help me understand sound from a mixed perspective, like a mixed perspective on the Mackie console. And you were the first guy to kind of tell me, yo, bro, you got to get your in-ears, because you're gonna blow your hearing when you in 20 years if you keep listening to stuff loud. You know, you just told me different things like you know, don't play down here. You know, leave that range for the bass player and leave that for the kick and stuff like that. So in a lot of ways, man, you've been a mentor to me, because I take a lot of that knowledge and it's sculpted and it's shaped how I approach things. You know, you're talking from a guy who was heavy left hand,
Mm-hmm.
a guy who doesn't even want to play that anymore and stuff like that. So I don't want you to not include yourself in my list of.
I appreciate that, bro. It's very humbling to hear it in real time. But you know, one of the sayings I use a lot is, I say, purpose is why you were put here. Legacy or impact is what you do while you're here, and legacy is the only thing you get to leave here. And so, and I want people to understand that if you're watching this and you hear us talking about a lot of church stuff and you hear a lot of Jesus and you're not necessarily into that stuff, understand that these are our principles that everybody should live by, whether or not you're playing death metal or not. Like if you want to have a lasting legacy, find the best way to do that is find somebody to
Right.
pour into, find somebody to mentor, find somebody to duplicate yourself in, if you will. So this is not necessarily only applicable to church guys. Like this is a principle, I think, that goes across the board. Well, let's talk a little bit about your story, because we worked together really for the first time at Kingdom Covenant, formerly known as Deeper Life in Toronto. We're gonna reel the tape fast forward through that. We spent about a year, less than a year, working together in that capacity. I moved on, you moved on, and then down the road you find yourself in the Middle East, playing in clubs. What was that transition like, from being like LJ, the church boy, church music director, and now you're off, no friends, no family around, you're kind of just doing this music full time?
God is. Oh, the light shut off. One sec, bro.
No worries. It's live TV.
It's on a timer.
Yeah, Elevation Church is energy conscious.
We are.
Protecting the environment.
You know, the thing that I said, it was my 30th birthday, and I hated the man that I was, because I was a talented man with a whole bunch of messed up tendencies, messed up thinking. And so my prayer on my 30th birthday was, God, make me who you want to make me. Dangerous prayer. And if I'm talking to the person who is not a believer, the prayer is something like, I want to find out who I really am. Put it in that term. And it was a quick answer. It was removing me from what I thought I needed to find out who I really needed. And that's what that desert being in Dubai was like. It was like being removed away from playing in church and everything that I knew how to do. Worked in the warehouse for a bit, and that was a completely different life, completely different set of people. And then going into the Middle East where it's just a party world. And it was I hated it, to say the least. Like within the first 2 weeks, I was like, this is not me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me, because it's everything that I preached to people not to be.
Right.
It's real easy to throw stones when you're good and stuff like that, but now you're in the same place that used to tell people, oh, don't do this, don't do that, don't be drinking, don't do that, and stuff like that. And now here I am playing music for that kind of that in a club, and playing top 40 music, so there's nothing sacred about it. Yes, playing Highway to Hell and all the stuff like that. And and so being there, I quickly realized I didn't want to be there, but then I also realized that I wasn't ready to go back. I wasn't ready to go back yet. So stayed there and learned a couple things. Mainly learned about myself. I learned about why I was wired the way I was, why I had certain passions for certain things, and more importantly, how to redirect passion. I mean, I'm not going to go into a deep, like, philosophical thing or anything like that, but there's a reason why, like, I'm passionate about piano, and that passion just doesn't stop at piano. It goes into other different things. And so you have to learn how to harness, you have to learn how to have self-control, you have to learn how to do different things like that. And being in the Middle East helped me change my perspective, because I learned to love music.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that I would be talking to Jason, April, 23rd, 2020, sitting in Elevation Chair. I didn't know that would have been the case, but
right.
I learned how to love music. So I got exposed to things that I had run away from out of ignorance. I dug into the Beatles, dug into the Police and Sting and Bob Marley, and really digging into Bob Marley, and like just learning all these bands, Oasis and Muse and things, Nirvana, Green Day, like all this stuff that I never even really cared to appreciate. That's right. Because it was different to what I had been I grew up in. So
right.
I grew musically, and then, but even that, after a while, after you know that you have a purpose and stuff like that, there comes a point where, right when that was about to get comfortable, my wife, she called me and she's like, "Hey, you need to come home." And just before that, I flipped on YouTube, and I had a lot of church hurt. Let me just say that, just to be clear. I had a lot of church hurt because various reasons, but processing all that stuff, and I flipped open my laptop, and it was the first time I heard Pastor Stephen preach.
Mm-hmm.
Blonde hair Pastor Stephen, and he's wearing a white suit. I believe it was the Easter experience, and preached a sermon, and it engaged me because it wasn't fluff. It wasn't like this. It wasn't a lot of the stuff. It wasn't a prosperity message. It wasn't like Christianity spun however wanted to hear it. It was the straight truth. And to this day, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I think he's the GOAT. I think he's one of the.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if anybody can really disagree.
You can fight me on that all you want, but I'll blow.
I don't know if anybody has any valid arguments against that. I mean, unless you were to say like who he calls the GOAT, which is like TD Jakes, you'd be like, that's the only like valid argument. But that's more like a Michael Jordan versus LeBron conversation anyway. So
yeah.
Either
Um, he looks into the screen, you know, and it's a tight shot, and he's looking into the screen, and Pastor goes, "Hey, look, it doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter where you've been. God wants you, He needs you, He has a plan for you. It's time to come home." And he was saying, "Come home to Christ," but that resonated for me to come home to God. And
Right.
I took that, went back home to. I didn't go back to Toronto. I skipped Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
I skipped right over Toronto. Probably sent Reynolds a message and was like, "Yo,
Yeah.
bro, I'm in Calgary."
You're like, yo, I'm in Calgary. I'm like, what?
uh,
Up there.
and went to live. You know, I got married,
Yeah.
and learned how to be a husband. Learned how to blend two lives together. I have the best wife in the world, hands down.
Second best, but it's cool.
Um,
I'm allowed to say that.
and so, but then there's this thing to life where you're like, okay, you know, and let me just say this. I wasn't playing. So what do you do, Reynolds, when you're a musician or a sound guy and you're not playing, but you have a responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
You go get a job.
Right.
Bottom line. So I'm going to tell guys, I mentor a lot of guys, and I tell them, you know, depending on a certain stage of life that you're in, you get to live a certain type of way.
Right.
Once you say I do, your job is to be the head of your household and provide for your family.
Right.
So if gigs lock off, Uber. If you can't get into this profession, get into another one. One other quick thing I have to say is I graduated school with a degree in biology. I don't use it to this day, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had to use it in seasons of my life.
Right.
There was a whole season where I wasn't playing, but I was using that other side, and I was working in pharmacy at pharmacy tech at London Drugs. And every morning, waking up, practicing the piano, and I would watch Pastor online because I couldn't find a church in Calgary.
Right.
There were churches, but I just couldn't find one that I liked. And
Mm-hmm.
he would be preaching, and I'd be in my living room playing along, and he'd go into hymns, and I'd play them because of my upbringing, as I knew them, and he'd go into worship courses and stuff. And it was just like, I was doing that for years, 2 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Even before we never really met each other. And practiced for a bit and had every plan and every intent to stay in Calgary.
Right.
I didn't plan on coming back home. But then you miss family, you heal, went back to Toronto, joined GTA, and was playing there and serving there. And that was the extent of it. I had thought that, you know, I had a good job, was married, had a house, and not that I said that I'd given up on the music dream per se, but I was just content because I was living in that day. That was the season I was living in. And the story goes that one worship leader came up from GTA to GTA. And
I remember that.
yeah, they had launched the campus, and you were there.
Yeah, I was mixing there. That's this now after years when we now get back together, working together again.
Yeah, you were there.
Yeah.
And the rest was, I mean, bro, the rest is history, man. It's only been I came down, did an audition, and got to meet Chris. Fanned out first time I met him. Met all these guys. These guys were like my heroes, man. Mac and Lance, and meeting all these guys, Aaron, and just being like, whoa, these guys are like the guys, you know. And chill guys, similar rapport. Spent a lot of time with Wade and played an audition, and it was just like everything had culminated to that one point in life. Every season that I've been through, every bit of practicing, every, everything that was done when I was practicing a chop and wasn't seen or anything like that, it just culminated in that one spot, and did the audition, and then the rest was history, man. It wasn't, we packed up our life, sold the house, moved down to Charlotte, and it was the best decision I ever made.
I remember I remember, I think one of the first services you played for Elevation was an anniversary service. And I was mixing, huh?
That was my audition service, bro.
Right. So your audition service, I was at Elevation GTA mixing that Sunday. And I spoke early in the broadcast about your articulation and how you play, um, and the reason why you're one of my favorite piano players like on the planet. Um, and of course, we you know had collective for a while, had a band together, and played some music together. But I remember that Sunday, and they presented. It was the 10-year anniversary of Elevation. Because I remember this because they presented Pastor Stephen with like a painting or collage of like 10 sermons like throughout that 10-year thing, and then he went into "Great is Thy Faithfulness," and I remember standing there behind that mixing console and hearing you play, and I was like, dang, that's my dude. And I was like, I was pretty pumped in the moment because first of all, I knew that and because I was mixing there before, there were times in the past where Pastor Stephen had tried to bring in a hymn or something. And I'm going somewhere with this. So for all the Elevation people watching, don't worry. I'm not, there's times in the past where he had tried to do stuff and these guys who weren't really him musicians grew up playing Hillsong and contemporary stuff. Yeah, they were following because they were skilled musicians, but it wasn't like that day when you played "Great Is Thy Faithfulness" behind it. And I was like, and so you talk about impact. Um, and again, in my opinion, I think your introduction into the Elevation Church system has changed that church in terms of how they do things, how they engage their audience. The church, in my opinion, is way more multicultural now in their music. Um, Not to say that it wasn't impactful to different cultures before. And I know, listen, you're gonna let me lay it on thick, right? So, I I I I I listen to a lot of the music. I mean, there's the prominence of a Hammond organ now in a lot of the stuff that Elevation does, and dude, I know you're a humble guy, and I know you'll never take a lot of credit, and the credit should go where it is due, which is really just God using you in the giftings that He's given you. But it was timely. I think He designed it that way. There are churches across many cultures that now sing Elevation music. It's not just a contemporary thing. It's not just a white thing. It's a worship thing, and it's become that kind of Elevation has become the voice of our generation as it relates to worship. In my again, this is just my opinion. But even a song like "Never Lost," and the energy of that song is relatable to different cultures, different generations. It's not just multicultural, it's multi-generational in its appeal and impact.
I I okay, let me try. I'm gonna try and do this because I'm not really good at this. Thank you for the kind. I get nervous, whatever. It just is what it is. I'm learning to say thank you. Um, I I hope you hear in the story that like there's an undercurrent to the story of being in the right position and being in the right place at the right time. And it's a calling, man. It's not a gig. And that's the thing that I'm trying to like really impart to everybody. It's a calling. The first calling was to my what I felt was my first calling was to my pastor. That was my
Right.
hearing that. And so that and just knowing how things worked out, pastor's 1 year older than me, so he's lived longer, but we grew up in the same time of music, a lot of the similar upbringings and stuff. And even his love for gospel is, if anything I could say, is it just I think he always wanted to go there, and we finally, and God brought the right team that just enabled us to go in that direction. I love the players that I get to play with. I love my band because it's like crazy how we can swing pendulums and it's not even like it's like seamless. You won't even feel. We could play rock one clip and do a Kirk Franklin song the next one, and then come back and do old hymn, and that is a testament to building the culture that he's tried to build here. So like a song like Never Lost was a fun song. You know, I think it was Pastor Chris and Tiff, they wrote it. And you know, shout out to Aaron Robertson, first of all.
Yeah, shout out Aaron, man.
I mean, he's we call ourselves the Keyboard Brothers, and that's just like he's my dude. Like it's like when he's not around, it's like I don't have my left hand, so to speak. And I can't come. And it's been like that from day one. That's the thing. Like it's been like, yeah, it's always been like that. Anyway, so he took the song and we just kind of sat with it. And I remember being in the studio and we it was just so organic how it happened. And then we added the organ. But that was, I would say the groundwork for something like that was being able to do an evidence project. Where pastors like, hey, let's reimagine some of our songs with a gospel flair on it. Right. Not trying to be anything that we're not, but just genuinely love this music. And
right.
It's a part of who I am. So, you know, all to see that now what I love about my church, what I love about what we get to do is that it just feels like we're able to embrace everything and just be who we are. And that's not us trying to do anything. We're not trying to be a black church, not trying to be a white CCM church. I don't even know what that means. And like, I don't even understand what some of that stuff means.
It's really people who come up with these things it's kind of crazy, but you know, for purposes of the discussion and demonstration, right? I mean, church in and of itself, and the gathering was designed to be, you know, if you look at the people who Jesus asked to come and be disciples, could not have been more different. A rogue 12, if you will, right? So yeah, those classifications are so foolish.
It's a strong part. It's a strong point for me right now. Let me sit on it for a minute, because it growing up, how we grew up, you and I, there are a lot of things that we were told that whatever they are, be it preference, be it a discomfort or whatever, and I really feel a sense of it's our job, my job, your job, to make sure that the next generation doesn't have to deal with those unnecessary boxes,
right,
in order to do what they need to do. And I really want to encourage all the musicians out here, or all the guys that are listening, sound guys, don't limit yourself to one thing because that's what you're comfortable doing. That's what we reach for.
Right.
When we reach for comfort, it doesn't even matter if the comfort's killing you. That's what we reach for. So when I see guys that are like, oh, everyone's playing the CCM stuff, what about the good old, or what about choir music, or what about this vibe, or what about that, or that's too black, let's get back to guitar chords, or that's too white, let's add more when I hear all that stuff, it grieves me a little bit, because it always makes me want to ask the question, yo, just how about you make yourself better? How about you make yourself better and be that guy that is able to play well,
right,
or mix well,
right,
in every genre, because that's what I think truly understanding the craft of a musician. Like, my Nord doesn't know. If I take my Nord piano and put it on an elevation stage, it doesn't know that it's on elevation stage. If I take that same Nord and bring it to my old Baptist church, it doesn't know that it's in a Baptist church. If I take that and bring it to KCC, it doesn't know that it's in a Pentecostal church or whatever like that. So
Right.
I don't know why it's a piano. So
Right. It's a mixing console. Mix the show.
if we're an instrument to be used,
Right.
I understand why we're not trying to be that thing. And I mean, I would take comments, arguments on that all day, just because it's just one of those things where, as you're growing older, it's just like, man, I feel like when people say that, it's just because they're just not comfortable.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting because you talked a little bit about our upbringing. Yeah, I mean, obviously I grew up in Jamaica, and to this day I can't understand why reggae music has been so impactful around the world. I mean, Jamaica is known for mainly three things. I've said this before, right? When you travel, and I've got the chance to travel around the world, and people find out you're Jamaican, there's three things they know Jamaica for, right? They know Jamaica for music, Bob Marley, right? And by extension, because Rastafarianism is really so entwined in our culture and in our music, they associate marijuana smoking with Jamaica, right? And then the third thing is more recently Usain Bolt. Like those are the three things that they know Jamaica for. So it's music, sports, and culture, right? That is what Jamaica is known for. And by extension, food is a part of our culture, which is impactful around the world. But I grew up in a church where reggae music, like it's funny. I'm gonna be my own guest on Learn from the Pros next Wednesday, but a mutual friend of ours, who's my best friend Nevin, is gonna come on and interview me. But one of the things you hear me talk about, my first real introduction to reggae music was not Bob Marley, because I wasn't allowed to listen to music, even though my dad wasn't a church goer. My mom was so in, like, to this day, and I'm grateful for my upbringing, but we weren't allowed to listen to reggae music in our house. So my first introduction to reggae music was actually a friend of mine loaned me Buju's record Till Shiloh.
Shiloh.
And the first song, when I heard this feeling I'm feeling, bro, I was like, what the hell is this music? It was like the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, and it changed my life. It's like, and it's funny that how I mix now, and even mixing different genres of music, because I don't only mix reggae music. In fact, it's funny you talked about your journey a little bit and playing top 40 music, and sometimes because of how we've been conditioned and brought up, we think that because we're not necessarily in the church or whatever, we're still not developing and working on our purpose. But then when you get to that place of purpose, like where you are now at Elevation, you realize how all that stuff was necessary to accomplish what you are doing right now. It's kind of crazy. But for me, like, I did things like, I was a touring engineer at the time, but I met this guy who had a country band who played bars, like small country bars, on Friday nights, and I go and mix his band for $150,
Right.
because I wanted to learn how to mix country music. I wanted to, and there's elements that I draw now from different genres of music, that factor into how I mix music I mix, and my approach to mixing whatever it is that I'm mixing, whether it be worship music, whether it be reggae music, whether it be, it doesn't matter. I can pretty much, I mean, I wouldn't be the best guy to mix a rock show, because it probably be have too much low end, but but I mean, you get what I'm saying, right? Like, it's crazy, crazy how we are able to really draw on our experiences. I don't see any questions in the comments. We might have to do a part 2 of this, because
Yeah, we do.
we have so much more to talk about. We have to talk about, listen, a lot of people who are watching, if you are not familiar with elevation worship, go pick up the new stuff. They've got a record that's about to get released. Well, we hope, because y'all keep adding new songs.
Man, no, it's coming
But
out.
they got some really crazy songs on that record. I'm talking well written, well produced, well arranged. And of course the new song Rattle is like so like off the wall and like out of left field, but it's like yeah, yo, it's so crazy because it's like one of, to me, honestly, one of the best songs I've heard coming out of Christian music in a very long time. Brandon Wells had a question, but I'm gonna have to defer that to our part two. Brandon, if you send me a DM, I can sort of help answer that question. And we'll discuss it a bit in our Discord chat room. So if you haven't yet subscribed, head over to patreon.com/Jason Reynolds Pro Audio. Maybe you can't quite do the mix masters, but subscribe for the community, which is only $5 a month, and we'll have a post discussion there in our chat room where we'll talk a little bit about how the sound and the band sort of works across multi campuses. Thankfully, I got a little bit of time at Elevation where I sort of learned the ins and outs of that system. It's actually quite incredible. So I can definitely answer that in our Discord chat. So guys, please go to patreon.com/, Jason Reynolds Pro Audio, and we will spark up that discussion on our chat room, and we look forward to a part two where we get to talk to LJ again. LJ, thank you so much, my friend. And I watch every Sunday, so I'll be seeing you playing